All right. I think since we are running a little late, I'm sure a lot of people have probably have gone out or probably be coming back, I'm sure. But we are up for a very, very exciting session now. Something which is been talked a lot about, you know, we keep seeing in the news, we keep seeing in our regular conversation, and something which is very important to discuss. So for that, we have an intriguing session on tackling piracy, copyright enforcement in the digital age. And for the session, we have three very eminent speakers. Mr. Abhishek Dhoreliya, founder and CEO MarkScan. I would like to request Mr. Abhishek Dhoreliya to please come on the stage. Mr. Arun Prabhu, partner Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Welcome, Mr. Arun. And to moderate this session, I would like to call upon Mr. Abhishek Malhotra, founding partner, TMT Law. Welcome, Mr. Malhotra. I hand over to Mr. Malhotra now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So the session is on piracy in the digital sphere and copyright issues. Just to set the tone for what we are looking at, what are the issues surrounding it, why is it even important to talk about? We've got a lineup of two great speakers, and I'll try and contribute to whatever limited extent that I can. Just to give you a sense of what are the figures involved, what are the losses, how do these things sort of take place, and what are the dynamics behind it before we get into some of the legal and procedural hurdles that people encounter and how we can possibly propose solutions or what we've done for clients. I'd like Abhishek to, he's prepared a very nice, crisp presentation which just puts the perspective on the problem, and then we'd like to sort of take that forward. So Abhishek, can we have your presentation and if you can just add to that, and then we'll take it forward from there.
Right, thanks Abhishek. So as Abhishek suggested, I think it's important to set a baseline for this discussion. Some of the important stuff to understand, which is not obvious, to folks not directly involved in this area, is about why does piracy happen to begin with. So gone are the days when this was exchange of files and some funny content between friends. This is actually now a commercial enterprise with significant amounts of monies involved. So I would like to go to the first slide.
This isn't working.
Okay, it is. Got it. So if you see actually on the left-hand side, this is what is called a piracy revenue chain, which is the fuel that is leading to piracy. It is all about advertising money by gathering as many eyeballs as possible. So if you see the brand owners or the advertisers, they of course have a remit to attract certain number of eyeballs, for which they lend out or they fund their digital media agencies which use the internet ecosystem, including ad networks, to place advertisements on various platforms. Now, in reality, what happens is this process does not have any kind of checks and balances as an industry as a whole. So a lot of these monies which are spent on advertising end up on all kinds of platforms. On the right-hand side is, I would say, a very conservative estimate of such monies involved globally. 1.4 billion. The reason I say it is conservative is because this captures only two major platforms, which is internet and mobile apps. The universe is not exhaustive as well. So, as I said, important to understand that there is significant amount of money flowing into advertisement, which is fueling this piracy. And in addition to the money, I would also want to point out here that this money is lost to the industry. It is lost to the nation. In fact, there are severe societal implications as well, because a lot of these monies end up on gambling-related websites, or advertisements. There's pornographic content. There is severe amount of IT and personal security risk associated with such websites which are getting funded through this advertising money. So after understanding the significant amount of money involved in this, let's try and understand the scale of the issue as well. So on left-hand side, what you see is the number of infringements addressed and identified just by our firm. And I mean, you know, this is not a global snapshot by any stretch of imagination. But in the last 12 months, 25 million infringements across platforms. That's a significant number. On the right-hand side, what we are trying to share is that no genre of content is actually immune from this piracy. So, I mean, be it originals or movies, sports, getting released on OTT, look at the number of infringements for each of the segments. So, originals, for one particular original, depending on its popularity, the number of infringements can range from 5,000 to 50,000. As you know, something like gaming, for each title, there is a huge amount of infringements. So in summary, what we are trying to say here is the scale of the problem is huge, and there is no segment of digital IP which is immune to it. So I think this at least gives us the context in terms of understanding why the piracy happens and what is the scale of such activity globally. I think this sets the stage for Abhishek to kind of take us through the next level of issues. And I will revisit when we talk about some of the potential solutions, Abhishek.
No, thanks so much. I think it's always important to set a context to what we are talking about and why it is important. Just giving you also, I mean, of course, now we are in the digital domain and we're talking about piracy in the digital age and what we can do in terms of trying to, we can never ever eradicate it. I think that's something which people should understand very, very clearly. You can't stop it, you can't eradicate it. You can try at best to contain it. And just to give you an example from the brick and mortar world, which sort of typifies this dilemma and this problem that brand owners and IP owners suffer from. So there was this study conducted in Hong Kong in the late 80s, early 90s, where there was a particular street that was famous for counterfeiting, selling counterfeit goods. The Hong Kong police undertook an action of raiding at least one shop every day for 100 days. For 100 days, every day there was at least one raid carried out on that stretch. At the end of 100 days, there was not a single counterfeit product available on that street. And then they did not do anything for 1 month. And on the 31st day, all the shops were back selling counterfeit goods. So it's, just to put a context, it's the commercial pull of piracy, of counterfeiting is so strong because the investment required is nothing compared to what the IP owner is putting in. And yes, there is certainly a risk. There are, largely it's a risk associated with perhaps criminal sanctions. Not every country deals with the problem of piracy with the same amount of interest, with the same amount of force as would perhaps the Western world. So that's the reason why people are able to evaluate the risk and say that the likelihood of them getting caught is next to nothing. And even if they do, they could be behind bars maybe for a week, maybe 10 days. And after that, the importance of that gets lost. So in the larger scheme of things, it's a great business model. So Arun, just tell me from your perspective, because you represent brand owners, you represent IP owners, I'm sure you've heard this problem that I've articulated countless number of times. When clients do approach you with this sort of a problem, just starting from very basics, how would you address the problem? Do you necessarily look at just that one instance, or do you tell them that this needs to be at least targeted, if not rooted out completely, but targeted on a much larger scale, at a much more basic and fundamental level, and therefore accordingly to be, the program needs to be set into it? Your thoughts on?
Thanks, Abhishek. So I think, yes, it's all too common, hear about it far too often. Far more common when it comes to tangible products and services or goods, but increasingly common in a purely digital ecosystem as well. And to use a crude analogy, to win this particular race, you don't have to outrun the bear, which in this case is sort of the bear of piracy. You just have to outrun the other person, right? When there's obviously, while the piracy industry, so to speak, is large, it's not very well organized, but at the same time, they're very, very good at identifying opportunities and identifying low-hanging fruit. So if you're seen as a brand owner or you're seen as a content owner which doesn't, A, have the means to track its intellectual property, B, doesn't have the will to, both in terms of time and effort, to track where it's being infringed, and third, to actually go ahead and do something about instances of infringement, then you're seen as low-hanging fruit because, like Abhishek very clearly pointed out, the idea is to get eyeballs. So how do I get the maximum number of eyeballs on my pirate site or my whatever other site in the least intrusive way? Who's least likely to send the police after me? Who's least likely to come and do a raid? Who's least likely to come and do a thing? And they obviously, as far as they're concerned, it's a very democratic process. They don't really care who does it. They'll always go to the person who's least likely to press the button. So I think, the point you made about being systemic and being systematic about this is very, very important. As an IP owner who takes my brand and my reputation seriously, or takes my content as being valuable, who shares the value I bring to my content, I have to expend time and effort to look at where it's being infringed, look at all of the various tools I have in my hand to be able to do this. We recognize that a lot of work that happens well before you come to your lawyer. Platforms are quite aggressive about taking down literal infringement these days. Courts are actually quite aggressive about enforcing mechanisms. There are technological tools, which I'm sure we'll hear more about, which will identify cases of infringement. So a lot of the, you can become a very, very inconvenient, a sort of hedgehog-like target for privacy fairly easily these days by not having to go file those 20 cases before various courts and sort of wait for 6 months for your orders, etc. You can become prickly far more easily these days, and often it's an easier process to determine. The tools for enforcement have become democratized, just like the tools for infringement have become democratized. And I think the first conversation is often about saying, hey, have you done this homework? Have you figured out all of these things first? And then let's look at what else you need to do to actually enforce these rights.
No, and I think it's what you just set out in terms of the backdrop to how to implement a particular program and what are the questions to be asked. The fact that, as you said, part of the democratization process, both of infringement as well as of enforcement, also has to do with coming down of the prices to be able to actually effectively enforce and bring about this sort of thing. For just again, from the earlier times, if a brand owner had to engage in a constant effort of enforcement, either they would go it alone and allocate a huge budget for that, or they would look at like-minded brand owners or content owners in the same industry come together. That's the reason why you have brand owners associations, you have the Motion Picture Association that undertook all of these raids, etc., across the world. So it's only then that it made sense for them, commercial sense for them, to actually go after the pirates. But you're absolutely right, and that's where I would like to get Abhishek's 2 bits about. We as lawyers have made a statement. We made that statement, of course, basis whatever experience we've had, that the process has become democratized, and there are tools available to be able to help brand owners and content owners and able to effectively enforce their rights. But now the difficult question to you, you let us know, because you're on the technical aspects and you're the one who comes into the picture perhaps before us lawyers do. What are really the tools that are available today to effectively, and I'm emphasizing effectively, tackle piracy? And are they really democratized? Are they accessible? If not, is there some way that information about that can be spread in a much better manner?
Right. Thanks, Abhishek. Thanks, Arun. I think one important aspect in addition to what Arun highlighted and what Abhishek just mentioned, one important aspect to also realize that there is a twofold challenge. So what numbers you see in front of you is the scale issue. However, there is an even more complex problem, especially underlying piracy on digital platforms, which is about the ecosystem supporting that piracy. What I'm trying to say is that if you think of a website, that website is visible globally. It could be registered in an X country. Its a domain service provider would be in a Y country. It's supported by data centers and ISPs in a Z country and using a content delivery network of E country. So, in addition to the huge amount of scale, the ability for one single tool, be it a technological tool or be it a legal solution, becomes compromised automatically because of complex jurisdictional interplay. And I think that is why, especially on the digital side, it is a holistic addressal of the problem, including technology, including working with lawyers, is where the answer lies. Given this complex set of issues, I feel that there is no one solution which addresses the issue in entirety. So, in our view, if you can go to the next slide, in our view, there is a whole host of measures. Next slide, please. There is a whole host of measures which are required by a content owner to address, not only a content owner, actually the industry to address the issue. So we've kind of broken them down into two buckets. Tactical measures, which we think primarily the responsibility lies with individual IP owner. There are pre-broadcast solutions, technology solutions. So you will have DRM solution to protect your content. You will secure your servers so that the content is not directly leaked for your servers. So before broadcasting, there's a host of tech solutions that need to be in play as adopted by the IP owner. And there's a post-broadcast piracy scenario which needs to be again addressed with technological solutions, including an anti-piracy exercise, getting in the legal experts to get a John Doe and other remedies in play. But unfortunately, because of the two issues, the scale and the complexity of the problem, I think there are larger strategic measures which need to be brought into play, not only by individual IP owners, but industry associations, by definitely the government and the regulatory bodies. And there is a whole, and it is a scenario where a multi-pronged approach would be required. Each of these solutions is a discussion item in itself, but I will jump into them as we progress into the discussion so that I can pick up the relevant one.
No, as you rightly said, each of these items, line items, can be a basis for a separate dialogue, and I think what we are trying to achieve in the limited time that's given to us is to give a basic backdrop of what exactly is available, what are the tools, both from a technology and a legal standpoint, that are available to IP owners to effectively try and impact the menace of piracy. But if we do get the opportunity, and perhaps when questions come in from the audience, we can address some of these, because I know that some of these are very interesting. For example, the National Infringing Website List is something which is a great idea. Ultimately require, like we had the development of the law from a simpliciter John Doe order to now getting into mirror image websites, to rogue websites, etc. So rogue websites would be something akin to a national IWL, and that's a great, perhaps, development of the law to come up with. And let's see, over the course of maybe in this particular year itself, we could have that development of the law. Arun, coming back to you, two questions originating out of what we just heard from Abhishek, and also in the backdrop of what you mentioned earlier. The first one is, is there, and like Abhishek said, that there is no one single effective tool to be able to address the menace of piracy, and there has to be cooperation between technicians and lawyers, and try and achieve a solution that can sort of be used in a particular set of circumstances. Purely from a legal standpoint, yes, the law has developed. We've come out with with interesting approaches to addressing piracy. But purely from a legal standard, can you identify a sort of a strategy that you would like to implement, you would like to advise clients in an ideal scenario when approached with an issue of piracy? And please be mindful that you are looking at a piracy that has no boundaries, no geographical frontiers. So how do you come up with a solution for a client, let's say, who's located in India but has business interests across the world? What would you advise them to do? One. The second part of that question is, in the constantly developing world of artificial intelligence, would you think that the answer may lie in bringing in some sort of a solutions through that process as well?
No, absolutely. But I'll take your first question first. One, typically, if you're a content/brand owner, which is localized, you have a brand or you have content which is targeted at an Indian audience. Your advertisers are paying you directly or indirectly to reach an Indian audience. Your TRP, so to speak, is coming out of Indian viewers. Then your primary focus as a brand owner tends to be to block access to particular types of content in India. Now, for literal infringement, where it's clear that it's infringement, creative work, straightforward, frame for frame, this is somewhat easier than it used to be even 3 years ago, right? Sophisticated tools, everybody in this room who sort of is in the business of enforcement has relationships with the grievance officers at most of the major platforms. You have the ability to reach out, and even on an informal basis, when you know that infringement is somewhat literal, you have the ability to go there and get a lot of this very aggressively taken down, even before you, in some cases, even before you get a court order, and lots of other cases, you get a court order in a reasonable, I mean, I don't need to tell you how quickly some of that can happen. You set records in this space. So I think first, know what's happening. Second, there is that immediate remedy, but one very, very interesting remedy that's sort of starting to rear its head is the MeitY 69A takedown process. That's a nuclear weapon, right? Because especially if you have, and it segues into your IWL list, if you know that there's a particular platform that's making a business, and that's a great point that Abhishek made, if you're making a business of getting advertising eyeballs by using infringing content, say parodies, say snippets, say, remixes or whatever else, and as a platform owner, you're being less than honest about enforcing the law of the land. MeitY is actually, in the aftermath of Galwan, has proved to be a surprisingly receptive audience in terms of saying, hey, this is a systemic problem that needs to be stopped. Now, obviously, this is much clearer when there are things like gambling, strategic state interest, crime, data theft, involvement of strategic players from a different jurisdiction. Obviously, much easier case to make. But even if there is copyright infringement for exactly the reasons you described, which is, because there's a systemic effect, because it undermines the country, it undermines your earning capacity, it undermines content, etc., or because they don't put in industry standard measures like age filters, and they have pornographic content or they have seditious content, that's actually a home run, right? Because you just need to go make that representation, typically business first representation, saying, hey, here are 5 instances of infringement which have occurred in this website. Bad actor, I've sent them notices, they're not following the process. Strike it down, right? And the moment you get a 69A block, that's it, that's pretty nuclear. Every ISP then becomes your ally in terms of blocking the whole platform. You don't have to go around looking for instances of infringement. Second, we've seen this new body which is sort of being created with the grievance appellate committee, right? Which is going to sit on top of all of the grievance officers, and fundamentally within 7 days of filing a grievance for takedown, if the grievance officer hasn't been responsive, you have the ability to go to this body. Now, again, early days yet, not clear what they will do. Obviously, a lot of the focus may be on the political economy of this. A lot of this may be on freedom of speech, and I use air quotes consciously. But one hopes they will also do their day job of preventing things like infringing content. There are MIB representatives and so on in some of them. So hopefully if they start looking at infringing content and they set down a couple of orders where they've written to platforms termly, it might be a parallel mechanism for enforcement much faster than courts because it's a dedicated body. Third, of course, moving to your point on AI, once there is a case of a clearly infringing piece of work, especially in the context of some of these things like the recent, the documentary which shall not be named and various other recent instances, I think platforms have become increasingly sensitive about the fact that they need to adapt to technological tools to be able to identify literal copies which are just being renamed and posted. The fact that they have to be nimble in order to prevent their hands from getting slapped for whatever reason is quite evident to them. So to that extent, if you can actually say, hey, here is my AI solution, which is industry standard. Here is a list of infringing like-for-like infringements which are out online. Please take it down. You actually get a fairly receptive audience. Flip side, of course, on the AI problem, of course, is that there's also, I mean, it's also enabling piracy in innovative ways. It's allowing you to bypass fingerprinting. It's allowing you to bypass tools that you use to identify infringing content. It's allowing you to create deep fakes and parodies, which are very difficult to police. And it's also being a large amount of infringement today is happening to train AIs. As people found, a lot of the creative AIs are generating works which are almost, if I were to apply a copyright test on it, I might actually find it infringing or at least close to infringing because so much of the AI has been trained on the basis of infringing works. So it's also a challenge in a different way.
That's exactly what I wanted you to identify in terms of both it's a double-edged sword, very frankly, AI. And I don't know whether there will be really a lasting solution to either without getting into the ethical part of that debate. But, I'm not going to bore the audience on that aspect. So, Abhishek, if you can weave in some of the stuff that you could not talk about with regard to your strategic measures, I want you to bring that in from the point of view of something that Arun mentioned, that is there a need to move from, and I ask you this more also because you're not a lawyer, because us lawyers, we always want to garner the entire control of the anti-piracy environment. Is there a need today to provide for an alternative, quicker administrative process by which we can deal with piracy more effectively, primarily because of the fact that we're looking at speed of action?
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. So if I have to weave in all, amongst the various strategic measures, and if there has to be one takeaway that I can present to this group in this forum, it actually integrates 3 or 4 points there. Abhishek, with your permission, it is actually something which I think is a preventative strategic measure rather than necessarily a post facto solve. And I would therefore pick up again, go back to the piracy revenue chain, because at the end of the day, this is about making money. And if there is one measure that we as a group can deploy, that would be to suffocate the system out of the money. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are other things required as well, but definitely this one. This is something which actually requires a mixture of technical as well as legal capabilities. And I'm now picking up points from some of the strategic measures. It requires a set of infringing website list, which is followed by the across industries. It requires ecosystem guidelines because the advertisers or the advertising intermediaries need to be tasked or mandated to follow certain negative list where they do not want to be putting money into. I think it's very important that there is a federal focus or there is a dedicated body towards this. And the reason I say this, and Abhishek, Arun, I think you can highlight this better, is there are some individual state initiatives, but they get handicapped due to some of the topics falling into the federal ambit, as well as the need to actually interact with global organizations, which can, I guess, be more appropriately rooted only through a federal body. It requires laws to be specific around that, and of course needs to be incorporated into the various developments happening around digital policy. So if there is one measure, this is what I would pick up. And in fact, there are good best practices or there are good initiatives happening globally around it which have been fairly successful. So if I have to highlight 2 such initiatives, If you can go to the next slide, please. So two such initiatives on the left-hand side, what is called Operation Creative is actually run by the London Metropolitan Police. So it's a good example of a central government enforcement body leading an initiative. Operation Creative is essentially mandated to do exactly what we would want here, which is to strangle the amount of money flowing into these platforms. The initiative on the right-hand side, it's called Trustworthy Accountability Group. It's an industry initiative of actually digital advertisers, which has self-governance components to stop this flow of money going into these illegal platforms. Both of these initiatives are, Operation Creative is based in the UK, Tag IB is mostly out of the US. Very successful initiatives, both of them. Leveraging, as we discussed, a mixture of infringing website lists, technology, legal experts, centralized focus, and essentially striking at the heart of the problem as a preventive measure. So, if there's one takeaway, as I said, which I would like to share with the group is, if there's one thing which we can do is to choke this flow of money into these illegal activities. Thanks, Abhishek.
No, thank you so much for that. And in fact, I wanted to take this discussion to end with this note as to how we disincentivize piracy. Because we started off with the background to say how it is such a great business model, how it is such a commercial success, and that's the reason that it keeps it going. So we have to find the solution. Cannot be only legal, cannot be only technical, it has to be to disincentivize piracy. And with that, I'd just like to go to Arun for one of the last comments, which is more of a technical, legal question that I want to put to him in this context. And what do you think about, of course, in the absence of a specific legislation that outlaws this kind of an advertising, in the current legal system, do you think that we have enough in terms of laws and provisions to try and hit the advertiser as a sort of an accomplice to piracy?
I'd actually, I think the answer is it depends. Fundamentally, the more you disintermediate the value chain between the point where a particular ad is served on an infringing website or an infringing platform, the more breaks you have in the chain of causation till that point, the more those breaks are determined by an AI or a matching engine or a price bidding solution, the more you have the ability to say, hey, I, advertiser, did not had specified in my rules that, PG-13, geographical location India, etc., etc. It becomes very difficult to go back and pin the advertiser down. And perhaps more importantly, I think we must become aware that the advertiser is the person who feeds this ecosystem, right? Do we want to, and again, whether we look at gaming, we look at crypto, we look at any of the other sort of gray areas where advertisers have had to sort of pull back and put in disclaimers and put in all of that, advertisers have been generally cooperative. Nobody wants to create creators worth crores of rupees, hiring people worth crores of rupees, and then, get pulled down because of everything. A campaign being pulled down, especially mid IPL or mid whatever, is the worst possible scenario for an advertiser. So if you tell them, do these 5 things so that you're compliant, they will actually be very happy to be compliant. So I think I go back to your point and to Abhishek's point earlier. I think what is important is to have a clear single source of truth and have clear rules of the road. That may be a better solution to getting advertiser compliance than trying to impose liability.
Thank you so much. So you've heard it, the audience from the experts, as to what we think is a half-an-hour quick fix solution to tackling the evil of piracy across the world. And certainly this is not the end. Certainly there is a lot more to be done, and perhaps many such seminars, conferences, panels to be organized where people other than the 3 of us will also put their heads together and think of other creative solutions that can be brought to bear, because as my panelists just mentioned, it's going to be a cooperative effort. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. Yes, sir. Are there any mics? Why don't you just...
Hello. As someone who has been a consumer of pirated digital goods, I'll ask this question. Is it even possible to block this? Means I have been, I today don't, because of different reasons I'll come to later. Because you're speaking of a list of websites you wish to block, that's not viable because there is VPN. Next, if you see how it works, you first have a torrent website. Now, torrent website owners has been jailed by Western nations till they exist. So that's possibly not possible to break. The data stays in different people's servers and laptops. You can't stop it. The other way is websites. Now, if you see these websites exist, you guys know about websites, but the content doesn't stay in these websites. The content stays in third-party data stores. Yeah? So basically, this website is not doing any harm. Yeah? Theoretically. This other website, these data store websites are doing it. Now, data store websites are also keeping good stuff. So they are doing something good. It's like saying that GitHub is using pirated code. It's not viable, right, to block it off. Well, the government has done it prior to this. I'm aware of that. But it's not viable, right? So how do you block it? Now, the reason why I today don't use it is primarily because AWS, rather Amazon.com, Netflix.com, Disney Hotstar provides me the same content at a very fractional cost, which I can pay for, which probably there are certain people who cannot pay for. So wouldn't it be not a better solution to bring that price down, maybe pay per use of a single digital asset, which does not exist today? Means the only way to break it is to make it financially unviable, as that gentleman rightly said, but fighting it with advertisers is a pretty difficult thing.
No, so I think one thing that we, through the course of this discussion, the one common theme that all three of us had spoken about is that there is no one single solution. That solution is not just legal, it's not just technical, it's not just, it's a bigger solution, of course, is to try and disincentivize it by throttling the money and ease of access to money. But you are absolutely right that the one very important part of the entire chain, we said that piracy is getting democratized, we said enforcement is getting democratized, even access to legitimate content is getting democratized. And that's where the content owners themselves have realized that, look, if they have to have a lasting solution, it can't just, rather than spending money on legal and technical tools, if they bring down their price per unit and for access to a certain acceptable standard, yes, people who want to take a free ride will always want to do that. You can't, take it out of the system. But you're absolutely right that the access to this at a reasonable price will certainly also impact the growth of piracy.
I just want to add on to that. I think part of your answer was in the question. We're all creatures of convenience, especially when it comes to our free time. The adoption of a VPN is often a reason for you to go to another website. The speed that a VPN, the speed drop or a latency increase that happens is a reason to go elsewhere. The fact that you have to wait half an hour on lag, especially on premium content, is a reason to go elsewhere. So at some level, I think the battle is also about creating disincentives. And if there are sufficient disincentives, then you're more likely to go pirate another piece of content. Like I said, you don't need to outrun the bear. You need to outrun the guy running next to you.
I'll just add on. Sorry, I can't see you, so I'll just stand up. One last thing, right? I mean, this is a classic question which I'm sure my friends here encounter as well. We do quite regularly. And one has to realize this is not a binary situation. So you said, can piracy be eliminated? Let me be honest and say, no, it cannot be eliminated. Like crime cannot be eliminated, like collections in a bank cannot be eliminated. It can be managed and minimized. So I think that is what one has to understand quite clearly. It is not a binary 0-1 thing. So a bank, when they do their P&L or they forecast their business plans, they actually have an apportioning for what they would think would be their credit losses. They actually have a full-fledged collections team, not to mention a credit team. So credit team is like a pre-broadcast solution, right? And a collections team is like a post-broadcast solution. They have significant costs invested into this, not so that their credit losses become zero, but so that they can manage their credit losses. I think that is what I would like to summarize with, in addition to what Arun and Abhishek just mentioned about various solutions. Yeah?
Any other question? Thank you. I think we've managed to not only keep within time, but also try and address one of the very interesting and important questions that underlies the entire process of piracy and why it should be even addressed at all. Thank you so much. Thanks IAMAI for this session.
Thank you so much to all the panelists.